This is episode 97 of the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I'm Carly Cade, and today I'm talking with Michigan American Saddlebred historian Heidi Madsen. Heidi has had a love affair with horses since she was a small child, and that passion for horses grew over the years. In 1991, Heidi was introduced to the beautiful American Saddlebred, and that love of the breed is still very strong some 30 years later. Heidi has worked at some of the largest American Saddlebred farms in Michigan. She first started out as a groom for Taylor Creek Stables, and then was a riding instructor at Jeff Nevitt's Stables in Linden at Sail Away Farms. Heidi has also been involved with the American Saddlebred Horse Breeders Association and is currently working on the youth committee. Heidi has always been a lover of history, and when the idea for her book came about to combine the two things she loves most, history and the American Saddlebred, well, she was in. Now, let's get into the interview. Welcome to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast, a podcast featuring interviews with equestrian authors who love all things horses and writing about them. In each episode, you'll hear inspirational stories from horsebook authors, including writing advice and marketing tips to help you write your very own horsebook. If you're an author, aspire to be an author, or simply love horsebooks, then you are in the right place. I'm your host, Carly Cade, and creative writing makes my spurs jingle. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I'm Carly Cade, and today I'm excited to have fellow author Heidi Madsen on the show with me. Hi, Heidi. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you for having me. This is a real pleasure. I've been really excited about this.
I'm excited to have you. And as I was reading through your bio and doing some research in preparation for the podcast, I found out that we're both fellow Michiganders. I grew up in Clarkston and you are from Fenton. So it's so nice to talk to someone from my home state. As people know who listen to the show, or if you're new to the show, how I always like to start out the conversation is asking how authors' love affair with horses began. So Heidi, can you share a little bit about that with us?
My love affair probably started from my mother. My mother grew up in Manistee, Michigan. So we would go trail riding all the time. We would go almost every weekend. We would go, and I just could not get enough. I wanted to be on a horse all the time. I had Breyer horses. I was just horse crazy. And then friends of ours up in Manistee, he had the full brother to one of the Budweiser Clydesdales. And he had a Shetland pony that was given to me by the name of Charlie. And Charlie was a little spotted thing. He was a real turd. But he taught me how to ride. We would go and we would just run like the wind out there and all that. My mom, she couldn't even watch because it would just terrify her. But I loved him. He lived to be the ripe old age of, I think it was 38.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, he lived a long, long time, but that horse taught me a lot. He taught me about how to take care of a horse and basically really how to ride. I used to ride him Western saddle and then just bareback. And we would just go and I would be in the saddle for hours, and I would get out and I would smell like horse, and I just didn't care. It was like being in heaven. So yeah, so from a very young age, I would say probably 6 or 7 is when it started. They've always been in my life and probably will continue till I take my last breath on this earth. So
well, we share that for sure. It's in the genes. And how cool that you got to share that passion with your mom. And I love your story about the pony, because boy, those ponies, they sure can be tricky, but
they teach you a lot.
They do. They sure make you a great equestrian. I'm really interested in this because you have been involved with the American Saddlebred Horse for more than 25 years. Talk to us a little bit about how that breed came into your life, and then the work that you've done with the breed in the industry, because you've done quite a bit.
Yes, I have. Now, prior to this, I had been doing quarter horses. So I knew absolutely nothing about the American Saddlebred Horse. I just thought it was a horse. It was chestnut and pretty, and I'm like, yes, this is for me. But I had no idea. When you're a kid, you think a horse is a horse is a horse.
Right.
There's not one breed specific. To a kid, it's all the same. And so I really didn't know anything about the American Saddlebred. And it was just working as a groom and all that I started to learn about the breed and confirmation and all this kind of stuff. And I worked for a farm called Taylor Creek Stables, and they are still in existence. They are in Davison, Michigan now. They're probably one of the top saddlebred barns in Michigan and very dear friends of mine. So basically, I worked as a groom. I got horses ready to be worked, whether that was being long line, jogged, ridden, and then I helped prepare for shows. And then they moved down to Oakland, Michigan. And then I'm like, okay, now what do I do? And so I found another farm, Pine Hollow Farms in Grand Blanc, which the farm is no longer there. It's now Pine Hollow Estates. And I took lessons there, kind of was like the barn rat. I would help out with whatever needed to, a friend of mine was the colt trainer. And so I would help out with breeding and catching mares and, helping them with the lesson program or just helping with the kids in general. And then I went from there over to a friend of mine, Jeff Nevitt Stables at Sailaway Farm in Linden, and I ended up being a riding instructor. And I probably taught anywhere between 50 to 60 lessons a week. And that was riding, driving, Western, whatever needed to be taught, I would kind of, take over.
So actually what's great is all these places that you're naming in Michigan are ringing bells and making me like reminisce about all these places because I've been to many of them. So the Saddlebreds just sort of wound up in your life because there were farms close to you that had saddlebreds where you could get a job.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
It's really interesting how a particular kind of horse winds up in your life. Often it's who you first start taking lessons with, or, the breed that your trainer actually does. And the saddlebred fell into your life, which is really cool. But I think sometimes maybe people who don't have horses that might listen to this podcast don't understand is each breed and each discipline has its own language and history and different kinds of tack. So when you choose a specific breed, there's like this whole segment to learn. And if you move to another one, there's this whole other area to learn. Yeah. But it seems to me that you really fell in love with the saddlebreds, even though you had a background with a different breed, because you're doing all this amazing work in the industry. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing with the saddlebred associations in Michigan?
I try to help out as much as I can with anything like our Ashton Horse Show, which is our American Saddlebred Horse Association of Michigan. We have a fall show that we put on. And so I last year developed an award. I wanted to do something. And so I developed an award called the Francis Dodge Sportsmanship Award. Now, for those of you that don't know, Francis Dodge had Dodge Stables down in Rochester. And she had the famous iconic Wing Commander. I wanted to do something because she was, a lady that really loved her horses. And she loved talking to other people about her horses. And she had good sportsmanship in and out of the ring. And I just felt that she needed to be honored. Her daughter, Judy, is a very, very dear friend of mine. And I kind of passed it by her and said, what do you think? And she said, it's about time that somebdy honored my mother. And so I've done that. I donate stuff for, like the auctions, anything to do with the kids here in Michigan, like youth. I try to get as involved as I possibly can. Anybody needs any help with anything, I'm the first one to raise my hand.
That is awesome. Yeah, you're giving back to the community that you love. And you're doing a real service for the saddlebred history and industry in Michigan. Let's talk about your first book, and then we can get into where you're going with the second. But talk to us about your first book, which focuses on saddlebreds in Michigan.
Well, my first book, my girlfriend and I, we were out on the golf course golfing, which my golf game is not that great, but we went out and, and she shows horses too. And she said to me, you should write a book. And I looked at her and I thought, you are crazy, woman. I failed my creative writing class in high school twice. And I said, there's just no way that I'm even going to come close to writing a book. Well, at the time, I called my dear friend, who is gone now, Lynn Weatherman. He was the historian at the American Saddlebred Association in Lexington at the horse park. And I was calling him for something else and all that. And I said, hey, do you want to hear this crazy story? And he goes, sure. And I said, somebody wants me to write a book about the history of the saddlebred in Michigan. And no sooner did I have it out of my mouth, and Lynn says, do it. And I thought, oh boy, here I thought he was going to discourage me and say, no, don't do it. But he said, do it. And we talked on the phone for our average 3 hours, which is our used to be our normal conversations. And About 4 days later, I get all these FedEx packages in the mail, and they were research. And he says, and he had a note in it, and I saved the note to this day, and it says, "Here you go, here's your start." And I thought, oh boy, I says, I guess this is my sign of saying this is what I'm going to do. When I had talked to Lynn, he said that a book like this had never been written before, ever. He said anywhere that he knows of, any other state, nothing like that. There have been books on saddlebreds. Judy Ottinger has done a beautiful book. It's one of my favorites. But it just talks about like the different gaits of the horse, the shows, the mares breeding, stallions, things like that. Nothing that's specific to history, to the horses that have, that are here. And so as I started digging into the research, I was like shocked at what I found. I mean, I couldn't believe it. Probably at one time, not at one time, but probably collectively, there used to be 75 saddlebred farms in Michigan.
Oh, wow.
And they were all the way from way past the bridge up in Iron Mountain, all the way down to almost the Ohio border. And they were like just spread out everywhere. And I was like, wow, this is, here I only thought there was maybe, a couple farms here and a couple farms there, but it was really quite shocking how they were spread out. And so I felt like an archaeologist. I started digging and looking into things in old magazines and just finding farms. I would make a list of all the farms that I found and then kind of go and research each farm and all that. Now, my first book took me 10 years to do because there was so much to do. I mean, it was, and I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, thank God I had Lynn for just a short period of time. He passed away before my book could, before it was published. But it was just, the not knowing, like, oh my God, and I had to make sure everything was verified and just a lot of fact checking.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, how did you lay out this book? So like, tell me the story that you're telling and hold up the cover and tell us what it's called. How did you decide to lay this out and tell the story? I mean, is it chronological? Is it by farm? Talk to us about how you crafted the story.
It's not really chronological. It's just by however many farms I could find and all the information that I could get on the farm, because way back when I learned, even with my second one, people really didn't advertise a whole lot, like in magazines and things like that. So a lot of it was like word of mouth, talking to somebody that I maybe knew. And they would say, "Oh, hey, I've been to that farm," but they really couldn't remember like the horses they had. Where some of the farms had big ads in some of the magazines, like I do Saddle and Bridle magazine, and so there's usually 3 or 4 pages of some of the old farms and all that in there, so I can kind of get some information from that, get on ASHA, which is the American Saddlebred Horse Association. Well, now it's the Breeders Association. I can get on and I can research pedigrees, who had the horse before. And this is Wing Commander that's on the cover. And my very dear friend Jim Walls, who is a fabulous equine artist, he already had this drew up, but I wanted to use it because the Wing Commander is iconic with Michigan. So I said, Jim, can I use this? He was beyond thrilled. So that's who was on my cover.
That's awesome. And it's a beautiful cover. Now, so I understand. So the chapters basically lay out the histories and the breeding programs and of the farms that you've found.
Yeah,
so you went and interviewed them. Yeah.
Right. Like in this book, it's just by the farms that I researched, like the farms that I went through and I found a lot of information on. I just did by however, if I found 5 farms or, 10 farms or whatever, those 10 farms were going in the book.
Got it.
I was able to find a lot of research at that time about these farms. A lot of people were still living, and still could remember. A lot of it was word of mouth. Everybody knew that I was doing this book. So it wasn't a shock when they would get a phone call or email or a text and all that and saying, "Hey, do you know this farm? I need some information." And sure enough, somebody would step up to the plate and send me something, or we would do a phone interview, or I would come out and do a person to person. So that was great. I mean, that really kind of helped fill in the blanks.
Yeah, and that's the horse industry for sure. I mean, you're doing a service and you're telling the stories of the farms and the history of the saddlebred in Michigan. Who wouldn't want to be a part of that? But also I find that equestrians are very helpful and they want to share information, and we like to talk about our horses, right?
Yeah, I mean that was the whole point of the book was I wanted to preserve that history. I mean, I'm a
Absolutely.
history nerd myself, and so I really wanted to get something on paper, that really preserved what we had here because it's really, I mean, it's quite impressive. I mean, I've had a
Mhm.
lot of people, email me and say, I've lived here my whole life and never knew any of this stuff.
That's
Never
awesome.
knew that some of these stallions were here, or, some of the brood mares that were here. And, it always makes me smile a little bit. I get a little teary eyed because, it's, people like that I appreciate, them telling me that I've done a great job and, this should have been done a long time ago. I'm like, yeah, I know, but, I didn't think anything of it at the time. I just, it was kind of on the back burner, but I kind of got the fire fueled underneath me to get it going, and I'm glad I did.
So what is the message in this particular book that you really want to get across to your readers? I mean, yes, there's a rich history for saddlebred farms in Michigan, but is there something else you want to help advocate
Um,
for the breed or
well, my whole goal in the beginning, even with my first book and all that, is I want people to kind of get the bug, and I want them to look into their own state
mm,
history with the saddlebred and start writing kind of like a an encyclopedia of the American saddlebred,
cool.
because it's all out there. I mean, I friends of mine gave me. I bet you I have probably close to 100 piles of old book like magazines, National Horseman, Saddle and Bridle, Horse World, and going through there. In fact, I came across one and all that. There was 6 pages of some farm in California. I
Mm.
thought, well, and it was just information after information. It's out there, and people just have to dig for it. So that was my goal, and that's still my goal, is that somebody will take up the reins and write the history of the American saddlebred in their state, whether it be Ohio, California, wherever. It's out there. They just have to dig for it. And that's the
Cool.
hard part. And taking the time to do that, I've had people say, well, why don't you do it? I'm like, no, I don't, I did Michigan because I've lived here. And so I know Michigan's history. I don't know anything about like the history of like Ohio or California or, Colorado. I mean, I don't know any of that stuff. It would have to be somebody that actually lives there that would know. But that's basically my goal, is to have everybody just take up the pen and paper and write about the saddlebred. And I mean, I bet you could probably get at least 30 books out of, I mean, each state. I mean, Kentucky alone would be a whole encyclopedia, but
Yeah.
that, you
Yeah.
know, but there's other states out there. California, they have a rich history of the American saddlebred. So somebody just has to want to do it, and that's the hard part, is getting somebody to get in, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I could see you definitely putting together a, promotion to advocate for this because there are some writers out there. There are definitely writers out there writing about saddlebreds. I mean, I
Yeah.
had Susan Archer on the show. Have you met Sue Archer or do you
Well,
know of her?
haven't met her, but we're friends on Facebook, and I have all her books.
Yeah, she
And
writes about the American Saddlebred, and there is an active fan base for people who want information about saddlebreds. So you could put together a Facebook group and invite people and just like put a campaign together about telling the history of the saddlebreds.
yeah,
And for you, what about the saddlebred has your heart? I mean, I really hear you're passionate about the saddlebreds. What about them just grabs your heart?
they're, well, obviously their beauty, but their athletic ability, their temperament, their heart. I mean, you can see when you go into a show ring and all that, you could watch a certain horse and they just love what they do.
Mm.
That's the kind of horse that I love, that just has that, will put everything into it and just shows their little heart out for their, themselves, their rider and all that. And boy, when they get that tricolor ribbon, it just, the whole persona of the horse changes. But
Mm.
it's their heart, it's their athletic ability, it's, they're smart, they're kind, they're great kids horses.
Mm.
It's a combination of all kinds of things,
Mhm.
that I just love. There's just something about the horse that captured me from the very first moment that I saw Imperator and Don Harris show. I was hooked. I mean,
Mhm.
it was the weirdest thing I have ever encountered. It was just like, this is it, and here I am 30 years later.
That's
You
awesome.
know,
I like completely believe that like your soul or your spirit or the universe or whatever guides you towards your passion. And when you know it, you know it, and then you just click in and you run with it. And that's obviously what you've done. Now, going back to the first book, how did you approach publishing this? Did you go independent publishing, or did you work with a traditional publisher? What was your process there?
The hard part was after I got everything done, then I had to go through and I had to really research the publishing company. There's a lot. And my big thing was reading the reviews of the authors that had things published. So I was like, I would make a list of the ones that I liked, and then the ones that that kind of went from the like list onto the unlike list, and and then finally I came across Tate Publishing, and they were based out of Oklahoma, and very easy to work with. I mean, my first time publishing a book, I had no idea what to expect. They sent me all this stuff and said, this is how you're supposed to send it. It was easy. I mean, wasn't stressed or anything like that. And then they decided to go belly up and went and the owners got charged for embezzlement.
Oh no.
It was a real mess for about a whole year and all that. There was a bunch of us authors that were trying to get our manuscripts back. Thankfully, my book was already published when all this happened, but I had all my files on a CD that they had, and I was trying to get that back because I wanted to do self-publishing. A friend of mine had told me about self-publishing, and I said, okay. She's like, well, you're gonna have to try to get your original files back. And they tried charging us for it, and it was a real mess.
That's so interesting. So this was kind of like a traditional publisher and more of an indie, like a small press. And you signed a contract with them? And sometimes those things happen where they have your intellectual property, so you had to fight to get that back when they went under. This is a story I've heard before, which is kind of why I advocate for independently publishing your own books through the self-publishing platforms, because you own your everything and you retain the rights to everything. So you had that struggle right on the get-go.
I did. I got a phone call from the Oklahoma Attorney General, called me and said, this is what's going on and this is what we need you to do. And so I had tons of paperwork I had to fill out.
Oh my.
And it was everybody that had books published or were going to have books published. I was like, oh boy, and I had to send all kinds of stuff. And then eventually I did get my stuff back. So I was able to do that. So, and then some people were getting their discs back, but they were putting it in and they were blank.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm panicking, thinking, oh my gosh. So I put it in my laptop and everything was on there. Breathed a sigh of relief and all that, but I felt bad for some of these other people who couldn't get any of their stuff back. And so it was just, it was a real mess, and it probably lasted about a year. We all had to fill out forms and all kinds of stuff. So it was a real mess, and haven't heard anything back. They said we probably will never get compensated for sending our money in, to have it published. None of that stuff. So and I belong to a Facebook page, and it's called X Authors of Tate Publishing, and it's been pretty quiet on there, so there's been no development. So.
My goodness. So what words of wisdom or warning would you give to aspiring authors who are in, with their first book looking for a publisher? What would you say after having come through this experience?
I would say, if I would have known back then what I know now, I probably would have talked to somebody who had a book that was through an independent publisher. And because I read all the reviews from Tate, and it all sounded great. Everybody said that we were great to work with, had no problems. And so I took that as being, this is a great company. So I went ahead and called them. I talked to a publishing coordinator and all that. We clicked right on the phone right away, and I thought, okay, but if I would have known what was going to happen after I had my book published, I probably never would have done it. Now I know that I'm doing independent, and so I feel a little bit more confident that I'm not going to have any problems. I mean, anything that happens, it's going to be obviously my fault, for not doing it. But really research it, really talk to people that have had a book published through certain companies and see how was their experience and all that with them. Was it everything that they hoped it would be? any problems, anything like that. The more questions you ask, the better off you are.
That's great advice. Yeah, I like to hammer home on this podcast, educate, educate, educate yourself, because we're talking about intellectual property, the creative right to put your work into the world through, all the different formats that are becoming available to us. So you got to be really careful, and you have to protect that, because like you said, it took 10 years to write your book. And then this company did some naughty things, and I'm so sorry that happened to you. And there was this possibility that you wouldn't have gotten your work back, and some of those other authors didn't. So thank you for sharing that
kind of
story.
Holding us hostage.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, yeah. And how lucky are we now that we have the opportunity to do this work ourselves? It's a lot of work, yes, and there's more education that we need to do, of course, but we own our property, our creative rights, our intellectual property. So I'm really glad you shared that, because these things happen, and so you really have to watch out and talk to other authors and see what they're doing and what works and what doesn't. And that's why that's why I'm having this podcast, so all of our equine author community can come together and share knowledge and help each other out, so maybe less of these things will happen to each other. How are you reaching your readers? I mean, clearly you've got a built-in audience with the Michiganders who love saddlebreds, but what are you doing to reach out to readers?
Well, my book kind of basically takes on a life of its own. The book is sold in 11 countries. So I get fan mail, I get emails all the time from people from across the pond saying, I read your book and I just absolutely love it. Everybody knows it's out there, and I do a lot of book updates, updating people, because sometimes people will say, they'll message me and say, well, what's going on with the book? So I usually do a monthly book update saying, this is where I'm at. And so it kind of gives everybody a little idea. I have a long list of people that are on a waiting list to get my book.
That's fantastic. So you have like an email newsletter that you're sharing updates with?
It's not really an email newsletter. I just do FB page. And then I have my book's website, and the FB page, I mean, it's constantly fluctuating with all kinds of activity and people messaging me, and I share a lot of the stuff I belong to all these saddlebred groups. And my book updates go on to that. And then that's, carried out to however many members they have and things like that. So it's kind of basically taken on a life of its own. I mean, my first book, I have it at the Saddlebred Museum at the horse park.
Fantastic. How did you make that happen?
Well, I called, and I've been a longtime member of the museum, and I called and I said, what are the chances of me getting my book, in there? And she's like, oh, sure. So I called and I sent, I think, my first 10 copies. Let's just say I can't keep it in stock down there.
That's awesome. That's built in. Who wouldn't want to buy a book when they're visiting the Saddlebred Museum about saddlebreds? It's like a perfect place for your book to be for marketing.
Yeah. And then last Christmas, somebody sent me there was a screenshot of their laptop, and my book was featured on the museum's webpage.
That's great.
And I got all excited and all, so it's things like that. I'm thrilled that my first book is not forgotten. It's still there, but like I said, it's kind of basically taken on a life of its own.
Yeah.
So it's not quite a problem.
That's the good stuff when things like that happen. That's what we want to have happen. And my impression of saddlebred folks is that they're incredibly supportive, and they're like a really active community, and they really support people who are writing books about saddlebreds. I mean, that's what I got from my conversation with Sue Archer when she was on the show, that they really just support and buy, and the museum supports and brings the books in. I think that's really wonderful. So get in close with your breed organizations, ladies and gentlemen, writing about horses of specific breeds. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, truly. I mean, some of the best people I know are saddlebred people. And and every year I go down to Lexington Junior League Horse Show, which is held at the horse park. And I love seeing all my friends, and the first thing out of their, how is the book and all that? I mean, what's going on, and, things like that. I'm really the only one that's written a historical book on the saddlebred. I mean, because I really researched this before I started doing my first book. I thought, well, I'm going to kind of figure that, and I couldn't find anything that was even. It was just general stuff. Like, there's books out there now. Like Smith Lilly has a great book. I'm a big fan of his, and it's called Good Sportsmanship. And he talks about how to train colts and things like that with different equipment. And then there's Gail Lampe, who is the head instructor at Williamswood College in Fulton, Missouri. She's another one person that I just idolize. And she's got a book on saddle seat, which I've read, I don't know how many times from cover to cover. And that talks about saddle seat riding and things like that, but never a book that's been just historically portrayed like mine.
Oh man, I see such possibility for what you're trying to create here. I mean, yeah, you took on Michigan, but I feel like if you jumped into those Saddlebred groups, I bet you could engage other people to take on the history of the Saddlebred in their state and write about it. I mean,
easily. Yeah.
Yeah, share your successes. I mean, you could be the person that rolls this ball and gets things in motion.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it takes something to do that and you have to generate it, but I hear you're passionate about it. So I feel like you could be the person that starts. It's like, okay, I did Michigan, pass it on to Ohio.
Yeah.
You do Ohio, pass it on to, Kentucky,
Right.
Kentucky, you did this, pass it on to West Virginia. I don't know, like you could get the ball rolling across the country and then like that could be a whole conversation and a story about how this project got going. I just see like amazing possibility for this, but it takes a spark to start the ball rolling. But I believe you could be the person to make that happen.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a lady in California. She had a post on one of the Saddlebred pages that I like, and she had all these pictures and all that. I said, you should get on. I said, and look at the history of the Saddlebred in California. I said, I bet you $20 and all that you'd be able to find a load of. I mean, you would be surprised at what you find when you dig. When you start digging and asking questions.
So this is an opportunity to express their history, just be an advocate for the breed. So I think this is so cool.
And my thing is people get the American Saddlebred confused with the Tennessee walking horse. The Tennessee walking horse is the one that has the big lick. Our American Saddlebreds, they are born naturally where they just trot. There's no demise, but behind it. It's all natural. I've watched babies out in the field and all that trot, so people will comment and they'll say, well, this is really, they have the big shoe and all that. I thought, no, that's the Tennessee walking horse. I get really kind of miffed. That's not the word I would use, but when people mistake the Saddlebred for a Tennessee walking horse, and it's like, no, they're two different breeds. They trot differently. They're, so, I'm constantly having to do that when people will comment and they'll say, about it's like, no, that's the Tennessee walking horse. The Saddlebred as a whole, Saddlebred is probably one of the most versatile breeds out there. They do everything. They do Western, they do saddle seat, they do driving, they do endurance driving, they do cattle driving, barrels. I have a girlfriend she's got one out in Colorado, and he does barrels. He's a barrel racer and bred incredibly well. They can do everything: hunter jumper, dressage, gymkhana. I mean, you name it, they can do it.
Well, I'm glad you cleared that up. Like we talked earlier, breeds have different things and people get them mixed up. I think that people that aren't familiar with gaited horses kind of clump them all in the same category. Yeah. So I'm so glad that you shared that, especially for people who are listening to the show, because on this show, we've got people and authors who are invested in all sorts of different breeds. So there's a lot of learning going on with the different breeds on this show too. So I'm really glad,
for sure.
Really glad you mentioned that.
And one of the things that I tell people and all that is if you're getting into Saddlebreds, or if you've been in a while but you're not really quite sure about the breed, go and visit a Saddlebred barn. Mm-hmm. I bet you if you were to make a phone call, I could list 5 barns and all that off the top of my head, that if you were to make a phone call and all that and say, I want to come visit and learn about the breed, they would say, when can you get here? We as a Saddlebred community love to show off our horses and love to educate people and tell them about the breed. And, so I always tell people, the more you can educate yourself about things, the better. It would be no different if I was breeding dogs and I wanted to learn, about the Belgian Malinois. I just wouldn't get the dog. I would go and talk to a breeder, be around the dog for a while, watch them kind of interact with, that kind of thing. So I always tell people, educate yourself, go visit a Saddlebred barn and figure out those horses get treated better than us humans.
I like to believe that all horses get treated better than humans. Like I'll buy something for my horses that they need before I'll do anything for myself. Yeah. And I love how you say educate yourself. Don't underestimate books. Like that's why you wrote this book, to help educate people. So, yes, there's the visiting of the horse, there's talking to people, there's plenty of places to get lost on the internet, but books are also a great resource. Podcasts, like yes, definitely listen. And anytime you're interested in something new, whether it's a horse or a discipline or becoming an author, check out your resources and find out what the information is there. Now, I like to ask this question to of my authors
Okay.
because all of our answers are a little different. For you, what has been the most difficult part of being an author? But then on the flip side, what's been the very best part for you?
The worst part is I can be somewhere and thinking, oh my gosh, I could get home and I could write a whole bunch. And I sit in front of my computer and my little icon just blinks. Writer's block comes a lot. I mean, it's not a, you hear people say I have writer's block and thinking, that'll never happen to me. It happens to me quite a bit. I mean, it's just one of those things where you either have the inkling to write or you don't. Sometimes I'll be sitting in front of my TV watching something and I'll have a pen and paper and just start writing stuff.
Mhm.
So that's been the hardest because it's frustrating. What I have in my head is I need to get in onto paper and it always doesn't work that way.
Mm.
It's just one of those things where it's like, okay, please, can I just type something besides I mean, so I try to, maybe read like a magazine or I go through some of my research and think, well, maybe something will trigger and I can get on it. And it's like nothing. It just blank. And then other times, if I sit at my desk and have my laptop on, I like to write to Frank Sinatra. So I have my Frank Sinatra, my Pandora radio, and I'll put that on. And sometimes it just flows out of me like a river. And then the other time I can't get two words out of myself.
Mm.
So it's very frustrating. It's not something that you just sit down and you just whip everything, out onto pages. It takes a lot of time, and you have to have patience because otherwise, if you don't, then you're not really. Then this line of work or whatever isn't really for you. So that's kind of it's been a little tough, and I've learned how to kind of deal with it a little bit.
Mhm.
And then the happy part is when I have people that come up to me and say, "Oh, you're the lady that wrote the book on this saddlebred." Especially when I go to some of the Michigan shows and all that, people will recognize me and say thank you for writing it. Or I've gotten mail or email saying thank you for writing such a nice book, nice, well researched book. And it makes me feel good that other people are enjoying my work because
Mhm.
it's not just for me. I wrote it for everybody to enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the very best part. I mean, because once we've completed a project or a work and we put it out into the world, it's kind of not really ours anymore. It's for others to enjoy and learn from or escape with. So, yeah, so I'm so glad you're having those experiences. Now, you've mentioned a second book a couple times. So, what are you curious about? What's next? Where are you heading? What are you thinking for the second book?
Well, the second book wasn't really what I wanted to do. I told myself when I finished my first one, I said, if it takes me 10 years to finish this one, I'm going to be 94 till I get my second one done. But talked myself into doing a second book, and it was all the farms that I didn't get into my first book. It's going to probably be a coffee table style book. And how I did this one is I did farms of the past, I did people of the past, and then I did the farms of today. So I kind of wanted to do a little bit of the past, present, and obviously the future. And so far it worked out. Because when I started to say when I was going to do my second book, I wasn't sure what area I was going to go, like how I was going to do it. I just had no idea. I knew all the information was up here in my head, but I didn't know how to like try to get it onto paper and try to like chronological. And then my very dear friend who I absolutely adore, Sina Bowling, she's the owner and trainer at Taylor Creek Farms or stables, gave me the idea. She said, well, why don't you do it like this, just how I described. And I thought, bingo, that was it. It was like a light bulb popped in my head and said, and that's exactly how I've done it, and it's worked out great. I've gotten more information on some of the farms that I didn't have for my first book because, like I said, farms in this one, where my other one, I have a lot more. And social media has been great. A lot of people have stepped up and said, "Hey, have you talked to so and so, or did you know about this farm and things like that?" So that's been great. But this second book is going to be huge.
So you said coffee table book. So this is going
Yeah,
to be hardcover. Are you
soft
getting
cover.
It's gonna be software.
So,
Are you
yeah.
getting pictures like for
Oh,
inside
yeah.
of it?
You got
Okay,
it.
yeah.
I have
So,
I have old pictures, like, from, like, 1930s.
oh, cool.
There's some pictures that are, I think I have a few that are from, like, the 20s.
Hmm.
Quality is still good. They told me when I did my first book that I could not have more than 10 pictures, and I'm like, "Well, that's not really gonna work."
Mm-hmm.
Then my second book, I thought, "I really wanna have pictures because you can't tell the story without pictures."
Right. I think pictures, especially when it's the history of something,
Yeah,
really helps put you in, the place and the time and the moment. So are
exactly.
you working with like libraries and associations and
Um,
newspapers to get rights to use the photos and things like that that
I
you're
lot of the people that I've contacted about the farms and all that, these are their personal photos that
Oh,
they have sent me.
cool. Yeah.
So, and then Saddle and Bridle magazine, who Chris and Jeff Thompson, they own the magazine. They have been extremely supportive
Mm.
since I did my first book to my second one. I can call them and say I need to use this ad and all that, and they'll be like, "Go for it." So I haven't really come up with any like stops on anything. Usually, like I said, a lot of the photos are for people that have personal photos or will send me ads that they've had, that I can use. But majority of the photos that I have in my second book are personal photos.
How cool. So these are things from like archives that a lot of people haven't seen before that you're
There's a
compiling and
lot of
putting
things I
together.
hadn't seen. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I was it was like kind of like Christmas when people send me photos. I get really excited. It's like Christmas morning. It's like woohoo. So kind of a neat thing. I had a couple photos that I had gotten. There were a couple stables in Detroit, and had never knew that they even existed and all that. He
Wow.
sent me the pictures, and I'm like, wow, this is great. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that is so neat. And that's the beautiful thing about being a writer, being an author, having an interest in something and telling a story. I mean, you're sharing a story and a history in Michigan, which is your beloved state, of a beloved breed
right.
that you care about, of horses that might not have gotten told if you hadn't taken on the
No,
project.
no,
And that is the beautiful thing. Like there's a lot of conversations now about history being lost or written over,
yes,
so you are putting this story out there and you're trying to inspire other people in other states to tell a similar story, so the
right.
rich history of this breed is caught. I mean, I think that is a really cool, powerful thing about being an author, and I commend you for taking that on and being so
Oh,
passionate
thank you.
about it.
Yes, yeah, it's definitely something that I never thought I would be so passionate about, 'cause like I said, I failed my creative writing class in high school, so I thought, "Oh, I'm never gonna, do anything." I had thought about a long time ago about writing and all that, and then this just kind of basically popped into my lap, and I thought, and then when I talked to my friend Lynn, and I thought, I'm just gonna run with it and see what happens, and then, and so this is what I get. I mean, this is the
Yeah.
end result. I'm thrilled, and I'm super excited about my second one because my second one has really got a lot of pictures and information and stuff that I have dug deep. I mean, like I said, I felt like an archaeologist out on a dig because wasn't easy getting some of the information, but I got it.
That's awesome. And
Yeah,
that's the thing too. Like first of all, if you have a dream and you want to accomplish something, it doesn't matter if you did well in your creative writing class. If you want to do it, you can do it. And you saw something through to the end and now you're starting a second project. And with practice, it makes perfect, right? You get better and better and better as you do this. And don't forget, like no author is an island, right? That's what editors are for. That's what graphic designers are for. That's what designers of any sort are for, is to help you put out the very best product. Not only that, but the people you're talking to that give you
right.
inspirations, like your friend inspired you for the layout for your second book. So remember to use the community of people around you to help get the creative juices flowing, but and
Oh
help
yeah,
make your product better. And it sounds like you're exactly doing that. And
yeah.
you weren't stopped. That's the
No.
biggest thing about writing a book, is just not being stopped, because our conversations in our head can tell us so many things
Oh
that
yes.
keep us from putting the words on the page. But if you have a passion and a fire to do it, just keep going, and look at
Oh
you. You're
yeah.
on book 2. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, in my other cover, my book cover, that's also that horse that's on there is by Jim Walls.
Mm,
Also, and then my girlfriend Stacy Kitchen, who I've known for 30 years, we went to high school together. She designed my book cover, front
mhm.
and back.
That's
So
awesome.
so it was kind of nice having that personal touch and all that. I'm a big fan of Jim's, and
Hmm.
so I always wanted to have his artwork on my books somewhere.
Hmm.
And so I couldn't think of that was the other thing that you have to think about too, is like, what do I want on my, on my book cover? And the first thing I thought of was I wanted Jim Wall's Saddlebred on my book. And that's exactly what I got. I messaged him and I said, hey, what do you think about this? And he's like, okay, so, and Jim's a big fan of mine too.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps. I possibly could have a third book that I'm possibly rolling around, and that's also going to have a Jim Wall's horse on the cover. So
yeah, go with what works. And it sounds like
yeah,
he's well known in that breed. So I mean that's perfect example of putting the right fit for your cover that will, make your potential readers really identify with your work. That's a smart move.
right. Yeah.
And Heidi, I have really enjoyed talking to you today. A fellow Michigander, makes me happy to hear you talk about Michigan.
Yeah.
I love Michigan. My family is still there. Can you share with readers where they can find more information about you and your books?
Sure. My book is the first one. It's on Amazon.com. All you have to do is just type in Gaited in the Great Lakes, and it shows up just like this. And it's also on BarnesandNoble.com. You can get it at the Saddlebred Museum at the Kentucky Horse Park. It's also at Meadowbrook Hall in their gift shop. I also have it at the Fenton Open Bookstore. I think they have one copy left. That's basically where you can get it. I have an FB page, so if you get on there and just type in Gaited in the Great Lakes, it'll pull up. Hit the like button, and I try to keep that updated at least monthly. Mm-hmm. With any updates on the book, and then anything, and I try to roll in my first book too, but people are really anxious to get my second one. So I have that. And then I have my website, which is www.gatedinthegreatlakes, all one word, .weebly.com.
Fantastic. And I will make sure to link to all those places in your show notes so people can get directly to you and get updates about the second book and pick up a copy of the first book if they haven't read it yet.
I never thought in a million years I'd be, writing a book on a horse that I'm so passionate about and that I love, and the people that are around it. There was a quote one time I heard from, this is going to sound odd, from Sister Mary Clarence from Sister Act. She said, if all you can think about when you wake up is being a writer, or whatever her quote was and all that, then then you're destined to be a writer. And that's exactly how I am. I wake up and sometimes I get book ideas at 3:00 in the morning and write stuff down, and ideas come from all over the place. You just never know. If you love what you do, you do it, and you don't really question it.
I completely agree. Heidi, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I hope you enjoy these Q&A sessions with wonderful equine authors who love all things horses and riding, just like me. Visit my website, carlycadecreative.com, where you can read the show notes, and make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you so much for your support. Want a free guide to secrets of horsebook authors? Gallop over to carlycadecreative.com/wisdom to have author advice delivered instantly to your inbox. If you are an author who writes about horses and would like to be spotlighted, please let me know. Visit my contact page at carlycadecreative.com to fill out a request. I'd be happy to have you on the show too. Thank you for tuning in to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. See you next time. I'm your host, Carly Cade. Creative writing makes my spurs jingle.